What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 12 cash pool breakdown for the upcoming main slate on DraftKings. As always, we are going to discuss every cash viable play for DK cash games and talk through the theory associated with making those plays, be it price specific, opportunity cost leverage, etc. This week, Week 12 is one of the most intriguing DFS slates that I think we've seen so far this season. There is a distinct lack of value, at least as of Thursday afternoon when I'm recording, and unless something opens up late in the week, I think that we could be on the precipice of the most difficult cash game construction so far this year. So, let's get right into it. If you like this type of content, you can subscribe on YouTube, and better yet, follow me on Twitter at Ben Hover. Feel free to ask questions, discuss, disagree with my takes. Any of that is welcome. But, let's get right into it, starting off with quarterback, which is where I actually have the most concise pool of players here, as it gets pretty dicey throughout the rest of the positions. But I've got four guys that I'm considering for cash games on DraftKings so far at quarterback, starting, of course, with the most expensive play on the board, Russell Wilson. Definitely a step down in terms of price from last week where Lamar Jackson was the most expensive play and the best play at 7,700. Russell Wilson as the most expensive play is only 6,800 on DraftKings, and I don't think that he is clearly the best play. I mean, he's definitely in the conversation, but, these guys below him are, certainly in good spots as well. When it comes to Wilson, he's averaging the most fantasy points per game of any quarterback on the slate. And, the Eagles are a pretty unimposing matchup. They've been getting a little bit better on defense as of late, but, I don't really think that there's any concern for, Russell Wilson in this spot. The Eagles have handled Josh Allen and Mitch Trubisky and a struggling Tom Brady, but, Wilson is a different animal, and he's got Lockett healthy, he's got DK Metcalf, and he's got Josh Gordon getting more comfortable in this offense. Honestly, I think it's a smash spot for Russell Wilson here. It makes sense, if the Seahawks were to play this logically, that they would, let Russ air it out in this spot, let him get a ton of pass attempts on the road. But, the Eagles are, good at stopping the run, not so good at stopping the pass. No matter what, Chris Carson's going to get his touches. That's the thing with Seattle. They're going to try and force the issue with Chris Carson. And Russell Wilson, is probably, again, going to be a really up and down play. Like I said, he averages the most fantasy points per game of any quarterback, but, that comes in spurts. It comes in 15-point games followed by a 40-point game. So he's not the definition of consistent despite, the raw points telling a different story. And that's sort of been, the story of Russell Wilson in terms of fantasy for his entire career. So he's definitely in play, no doubt about it. I think another popular option in this price range for only 100 less is going to be Matt Ryan. Now, the Bucs as a team have allowed 27 points or more to be scored against them in 9 out of 10 games. Rightfully so. The Falcons have a really high implied team total, 27.5. So, if the Falcons are going to be putting up 27 points or more in this spot, it makes sense that Matt Ryan is going to have a great game. He's only thrown 3 total touchdowns since returning from his injury, over the last 2 weeks, 2 road division games. Now he has another division game. At least he's home this time, facing a team that should theoretically be able to keep up with the Falcons. We don't really know how real their defense is, although I think that people are starting to buy into it more and more. I mean, perhaps we're in a situation where, a Winston meltdown could limit Matt Ryan's upside in the sense that they would, be able to control the game for the second half and into the fourth quarter and lean less on Matt Ryan, to carry the team through the air. So Matt Ryan, though, I mean, it's a phenomenal matchup, and he should find a lot of success against the Bucs through the air. Obviously, we'll talk about Julio Jones in a little while, but Julio is going to be a really chalky play this week for a lot of reasons. So, I think it's going to make sense for a lot of people to just roll that stack out in cash games. So, going a little bit lower, I think it's going to be tough to get up to either of those two guys in cash games this week. Unlike last week where I really thought that paying up for Lamar Jackson over guys like Kyle Allen, over guys, I don't even know who else people were considering, I guess. But, I think this week is a different story. We're going to really need to pay down, especially, for example, in this mid-range. I think there's some good plays looking at Derek Carr. And look, Derek Carr is not an elite quarterback, not by any stretch, but this Jets defense is a pure pass funnel. And, they might force Oakland to get away from just pounding the ball with Josh Jacobs and really let Carr soar in a matchup that has really allowed guys like, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Gardner Minshew and Daniel Jones all to finish as top 6 fantasy quarterbacks in 3 out of the last 4 matchups versus the Jets. So, Derek Carr, I think, is definitely the best out of that group of players and should definitely find success in this spot. He's got stackable options for GPPs, whether it's Tyrell the Gazelle, Waller, even Renfro. Derek Carr, I think, is squarely in play at 6,100. Where it gets a little bit tricky is that Baker Mayfield is 200 less, and, the Browns are tied for the Saints with the highest implied team total by Vegas this week with 27.75 implied points. It hasn't been pretty for Mayfield, this season, especially when we consider the expectations coming into the season. And then over the last couple of weeks, last 4 games specifically, he's averaging just over 17 points per game on DraftKings. But, looking at it, I don't think that that's crazy. He faced the Steelers, he faced the Bills, he faced Denver on the road, he faced New England on the road. That's a really insane and daunting stretch of opposing defenses for a quarterback. And then, now this week, week 12, he comes home to face an absolute cupcake in the Dolphins, a defense that just allowed Josh Allen to finally find his ceiling, post the top quarterback score of the week last week. I think people are going to be on Mayfield this week, and I think that it's a good play, by every account. Mayfield for 5,900 could definitely see a ceiling game in this spot. Moving on here to running back. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. Christian McCaffrey for the 3rd straight week is 10.5K. Now, for the last 2 weeks and really even in a longer stretch than that, McCaffrey has been a no-brainer cash game play. It didn't matter that he crossed that 10K threshold. He was a smash play in each of the last 2 weeks. Fading him was an absolute, lapse in process if you went about that, which a lot of people did. His ownership has not been, really anything to write home about, especially in cash games. But, this week I think it's actually going to be pretty justifiable to potentially get away from Christian McCaffrey. And a lot of that is going to go towards the other guys on this list that I think are in pretty good spots. McCaffrey is not in a good spot. It's a tough matchup. New Orleans is allowing only 3.67 yards per carry. They've only allowed 5 touchdowns to running backs over their last 10 matchups, and they're top 5 in terms of limiting pass catching backs. That being said, I don't think that Christian McCaffrey is going to score under 20 points. Just the volume he's getting is so dominant. If he were being priced down for his matchup, the way some of these guys are being priced up for their matchup, I think that, we could definitely go back there. But when it just comes to the lack of value, the tough matchup, and the other running backs that appear to be in really good spots for less salary, I think that, we actually have to consider for the first time in weeks, I don't even know how many weeks, but several weeks, from getting away from Christian McCaffrey in cash games. And that's a scary proposition because, if I'm thinking that, and, I've thought that he was a 100% play each of these last weeks, and he was only coming in 40%, we might get McCaffrey at, say, 20-30% in cash this week for the first time all year. And if that's the case, I really am concerned to fade him. But even so, look at some of these other guys, and we'll talk through it about why I think that they're very viable for cash games if we're getting away from McCaffrey. Alvin Kamara, despite Latavius Murray playing 40% of snaps last week, Kamara is dominant, still. I mean, he's had 10 targets in back-to-back weeks, and I think that finally, we're going to see that Alvin Kamara, explosion week. We've only seen it once this year. And we had gotten accustomed to seeing it several more times per season over the last couple, and really only in week 3 did that happen this year, where he scored his only 2 touchdowns of the season against Seattle, 1 rushing and 1 receiving. And, there's no better spot to get right in terms of scoring, getting in the end zone for running backs than facing Carolina, who's surrendered 18 touchdowns to opposing backs this season. I think that Kamara finally has one of those spots where he could be a slate breaker. And at 8,200, you're saving over 2K by going down from McCaffrey. You're getting a better matchup You're getting a team that is at home. They have the highest implied team total. You're tied with the Browns, I should say, for the highest implied team total on the slate. I think that Kamara is arguably the top running back play of the slate. For 100 less than Alvin Kamara, we could plug in Nick Chubb. And I'll talk about Chubb and Kareem Hunt here, who is the lowest priced option I'm considering for cash at this point in the week. Now, look, Nick Chubb has averaged 23.5 carries per game over the last 2 games since the return of Kareem Hunt. He sets up really well in the spot. He's at home, tied with the Saints, like I've said for the 3rd time, with the highest implied team total on the slate, and the Browns are favored by over a touchdown in this spot. I think it's 11 or 11.5 at this point. Everything sets up really well for Nick Chubb, except when you look at the fact that, Kareem Hunt has fully taken over all receiving work, in this backfield since returning. He's had 13 receptions in his 2 games, Kareem Hunt has, compared to Nick Chubb's 2, averaging 1 per game for Chubb now at this point. Look, it's I don't know if it's right or if it's wrong. Obviously, Kareem Hunt is adding a spark to this offense in a certain way. But, it's really, I think, capping the upside of both of these guys. I mean, Nick Chubb's upside is nowhere near Alvin Kamara's. And then for 200 less, Saquon Barkley, who I'll talk about in a minute, I think just also has, a much higher upside just because he's not splitting with somebody who's vulturing such a high percentage of their, pass game equity from them. So, when you look at Chubb and Hunt over the last 2 weeks, neither of them have scored a touchdowns. Freddie Kitchens completely melts down when the Browns get in the red zone, which has, caused struggles for all of their offensive players. Mayfield, Beckham, obviously both of the running backs. So it's difficult, I think, because of the price tag to think about fitting Nick Chubb in cash. But, I mean, he certainly projects as a great play. No doubt about it. But, honestly, I'm a little bit more interested for 200 less in Saquon Barkley. Now, look, Barkley had a really, honest to God, terrible game in his last matchup, the game before the bye against the Jets. But, listen, he came back. He hasn't been limited in practice following the bye, and the Bears defense is vulnerable to dual threat quarterbacks. They're allowing just about 130 yards per game and the second most receptions per game to opposing backs. They've allowed over a touchdown per game to running backs. And, for 7,900, Saquon Barkley offers a really high floor. He has no game under 5 targets this entire season, so he's getting that usage. And we really just haven't seen the touchdowns being scored by him, which we know he's capable of. I think that he sets up really well in this spot against Chicago, who we don't really know who's going to be playing quarterback for them yet. Trubisky's questionable. Nagy said that he will, give Trubisky the starting job back when he is quote unquote healthy. But I think either way, it would be pretty reasonable to expect the Giants to win this game on the back of Saquon Barkley. And for only 7,900, his role, his usage, his volume is extremely favorable. And, people are going to want to play Zeke Elliott too this week. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's 7,500. Zeke is, typically an 8 to 8.5 to 9K player on DraftKings. But look, the Pats defense is weak against stopping the run. I mean, at least in terms of Patriots defense, it's the weakest spot that you can look to exploit on their defense, especially compared to their elite pass defense. But that being said, as much as they're giving up yards, they've got that bend but don't break mentality. They've only allowed 1 running back touchdown all season. So look, Zeke isn't going to be likely to score a touchdown in this spot despite the attractive price tag. And when you look at that, and when you look at the fact that he's coming off of 3 straight games with, 2 receptions or less, I think that, you look at Saquon Barkley for only 400 more, and you look at his receiving floor, and you look at his matchup, and I think that I much prefer Saquon Barkley. I much prefer Alvin Kamara. So those are going to be the 2 guys that I think that I'm going to be prioritizing when I'm looking at running backs above 7K. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey would be ideal, but I just don't see it on the slate. We'll get to wide receiver here shortly, and you're just going to see, there's really no value. I don't see the clear path to getting up to a 10.5K player this week, unless we're just making major sacrifices. With Kamara and Barkley both in pretty solid spots, I think that is going to be the ideal lineup construction, in terms of running back and just overall this week for week 12. Now, if we go under 7K, Derrick Henry is I mean, similar to Josh Jacobs last week, who I played in cash, and, I felt a little bit uneasy about that because of the uncertainty and the low floor, especially in the receiving game. But, the Jags are allowing well over 5 yards per carry to running backs. Derrick Henry is a player who traditionally throughout his career, really turns up in the second half as the Titans continue to lean on him, as the Titans continue to realize they have quarterback problems. And, I don't care that Ryan Tannehill has been decent. Look, Derrick Henry is the engine of this offense. And we just saw last week, the Colts pretty much were able to really just put it on the Jags on the ground. They gave up almost 300 yards on the ground. They gave up 3 touchdowns on the ground to the Colts, and that was after, losing Marlon Mack halfway through the game. So Derrick Henry for 6,900, I think, is going to have a lot of opportunity in this game to really put it on them. And we've seen that, Derrick Henry, any given week, can just break off a monster run. He can get 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns in any given week. And I think that this really sets up well to be one of these Henry ceiling games. And for 6,900, obviously it's not salary relief. You're still paying up to get there. But, with very little in terms of high floor, below 6K, unless you're going to play Kareem Hunt and try and, chase that 6.5 targets, or I'm sorry, 6.5 receptions per game and just sort of bank on that, or, even go lower, put James White on there, who I think sets up well this week, but I'm not really considering for cash because I think Hunt is a higher upside version of James White. I think that Henry is just about as low as you're going to want to go in this spot, unless you're, really willing to take that risk in that 1,300 by going down to Kareem Hunt. So, that's what I've got for running back this week. I'm going to move on to receiver here, and you're going to see why, this week gets really tough right now. So, as you can see, there's a lot to like at the top end of wide receiver. Michael Thomas, for obvious reasons, just continues to be on pace to break, the all-time receptions record for wide receiver in the NFL, and he's just the definition of consistent, facing a much tougher matchup this week after coming off of back-to-back just complete nut spots against Atlanta and Tampa Bay, 2 of the worst teams in the league at defending wide receivers. Now they face Carolina, who has had a pretty decent, ability to stop wide receivers. Obviously, Calvin Ridley completely snapped on them last week, but, they were without Bradbury, who I think is projecting to return this week. And either way, I'll be honest, I put Michael Thomas in here because he is cash viable, but, he's not week 12 viable in cash games, just because, you can't pay 9,300 for a wide receiver this week on DraftKings in cash games. It's just not the right way to approach this week, in my opinion, and I think, the numbers would back that up. So let's talk about Julio Jones and Mike Evans, and I think that we can talk about them in conjunction because, specifically with cash games, it's unrealistic to expect to fit both of them in. It's really going to be one or the other, if you can even get up to either of them on this, value-depressed week. But, Julio Jones is going to be really chalky this week. And if there's one thing we know about Julio Jones and chalk, it's that they do not mix. Julio Jones weeks really come on weeks that it's not expected. And Julio tends to bust in these weeks, where we're all expecting a monster game. Obviously, this spot sets up well, but this would not be the first, nut matchup for Julio Jones where he disappointed and came in at high ownership in cash games. Obviously that's a little bit more anecdotal than statistically backed. I don't have, the stats of Julio Jones, cash game ownership or even DraftKings ownership in general versus production. So I'm sort of more speaking anecdotally here as somebody who's been playing DFS for years now. And I think that a lot of vets out there will also agree with that. But, let's look at these two players, right? Mike Evans, 7,300s, and Julio Jones, 8K. Look, over the last 4 games, Julio has 38 targets. Evans has 42. Julio has 25 receptions over his last 4. Evans has 31. Julio has 415 yards to Evans 529, and Julio has 0 touchdowns to Evans 3. So tell me, please, why is Julio Jones projected to be chalk when Mike Evans is clearly a better play? Everybody is really getting themselves hard about this Julio Jones chalk week. But let me tell you, for 700 cheaper, you can get a guy who has, more targets, more receptions, more yards, and 3 more touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. I just think that it's time to load up on Mike Evans this week for 7,300 and just sail to the glory. It's time. Now, moving on from Evans, I think Odell Beckham, for the same reasons that Mayfield is going to be popular, is going to be popular. We just saw, a team stack against the Miami Dolphins winning, all the money last week, and Allen to John Brown. Now, we've got Mayfield to OBJ in this spot. And look, OBJ has had under 14 DK points in every game but one over his last 8. So that is really, really concerning. It's the worst stretch of OBJ's career by far. Obviously there's a lot of reason to expect some positive regression in this spot against Miami. And, that being said, all leverage that we would have had in going there has been sort of nullified by DraftKings, being preemptive and pricing Odell up, to account for the fact that everybody was going to want to play him and everybody was going to want to be on, the bounce back before it happened. So, he's the highest price he's been on DraftKings since week 5, double-digit targets over his last 2 games, and he's only catching 40% of those, 9 receptions on 22 targets. For $7K on a week where we need to find value, if I'm going to be paying $7K or higher for a wide receiver, I think it would be Evans, and I think it would be even Julio ahead of Odell Beckham in this spot. I don't mind going there for tournaments depending on the ownership. I think even the leverage there is going to be low. But, everything sets up well for OBJ to be a good pure play. It's just things get shaky when you start looking at it in the context of the entire slate that we're dealing with here. And then, you look at these other plays in the 6 to, 6.4K range. We've got DJ Moore and DJ Chark both at 6.4K. And look, DJ Moore along with Christian McCaffrey is the sole Panther consistently overcoming how bad Kyle Allen is. And I think it's purely based off volume, similar to Christian McCaffrey, but 11.25 targets per game over his last 4. The Saints are projected to be without Marshawn Lattimore once again, and he seems like a good play for the second straight week. He did see a slight price bump, up 500 from last week where DJ Moore was chalk. And then DJ Chark has shown throughout the year, and especially with Foles, that he's an incredibly explosive downfield threat with a consistent target share in this offense. I think both are really comparable. I think both are very solid. I think I would probably lean more in a 1v1. But, even so, it's incredibly difficult, I think, just in terms of early constructions to even get up into this price range for wide receiver in cash games. And then, right below these two guys, we've got Metcalf, who I think is in a great spot. We've seen Metcalf's target share just continue to rise throughout the season. I mean, he's clearly, a pivotal part of this team. I mean, 9 targets or more in 3 out of the last 4, and this Eagles secondary doesn't really have a hope of stopping him, I don't think. And then, for 100 less, again, Jamison Crowder, 6,200, has been hyper consistent. He's had a 26.2% target share in this Jets offense. And, everybody's been waiting for Robbie Anderson week to happen, but, 3 straight weeks of great matchups and Robbie Anderson isn't happening. So I don't know why he would happen this week. I think that, if you're going to lean anywhere in the Jets passing game, it would be with Jamison Crowder at 6,200. Again, just incredibly difficult to get up to that price range. Now, I think one of the best value plays, if you will, is going to be Devontae Parker at 5.2K even. He's had 10 targets in 3 out of his last 5 games. He's averaged 15.9 points over those games. And, perhaps most impressively in this stretch, he won the battle against Tre'Davious White last week in a road trip to the Bills, where he put up 7 for 135, 23.5 DK points. He's only 5.2K. He has 23 more targets than the next closest Dolphins pass catcher in games with Ryan Fitzmagic. So, he's been super consistent, and for 5K, I think that we need to jump on that. I'm sorry, for 5.2K, I think we need to jump on that and really, let that happen in our lineups because, it gets really ugly under 4K. The ugliest it's been in recent memory. We need to find value where we can. If we're looking at some of these other plays, it just gets so shaky. Do we want to play a Steelers wide receiver? Obviously that's really only in play, I think, if Juju misses, which he's expected to. I thought that early in the week, James Washington looked like he could be a play at 5K even, but, with Deontay Johnson returning and, just the Steelers being completely atrocious, I think it's really hard to really like either of these guys in cash games. I think I would lean Washington over Deontay Johnson personally, but it's just such a toss-up. It's really hard to trust either of these guys. We've got Hunter Renfrow for 4.5K, who I think is a decent play. He's seen his usage increase as the year went on for Oakland. A lot of his production is coming down to touchdowns, which I think is concerning in terms of cash games and projectability. But the matchup is great, and we might need to make some shaky plays like playing Hunter Renfrow in cash in this Week 12 to really solidify some of the other spots in our lineup. And then, what are we going to do? Play Taylor Gabriel for 4.2K? I mean, look, he had 14 targets last week, but, other than that, he's had more than 7 targets just once this entire season. Yeah, it's a good matchup against the Giants, but come on, we're talking about Taylor Gabriel. He's not going to repeat a double-digit touchdown performance. I think it's more likely that he has 4 or 5 targets in this game. So it's just going to be really difficult. Hopefully some value opens up. I think, it wouldn't be horrible to play one of those Steelers wide receivers in cash, but it's just ugly. It's really ugly, and we don't really have the money to get up to the high-priced wide receivers, especially if we're playing Kamara, Barkley, and Henry, or Kamara, Barkley, and Chubb, or any of these combination of high-priced running backs. It's just going to be really difficult to find the salary needed unless, of course, things change throughout the week. Moving on to tight end, one of the only plays that I think is actually, a complete smash would be Zach Ertz. For 6K, he's had 11 targets in back-to-back games. He's finally being utilized the way a player with his talent should be. He's averaging 98.5 yards in the last 2, and he comes into a game with, I would say shootout potential, maybe not, like complete shootout potential, because that's not really the way these teams play ideally, but, you could see it happening with Wentz and Wilson. If things start to break down, this could go back and forth, no doubt about it. But look, his cash viability is being mitigated by the price, his price. He's gone up from 4,700 to 5K. Now he's 6K in a 3-week span. So yeah, would I like to play Zach Ertz in cash for 6K? No doubt about it. But, everything this week comes down to what fits. And does a tight end for 6K fit? I don't know that it does, especially when we've got a guy like, Dallas Goedert in here, consistently getting tight end touchdowns that could be going to Ertz. Goddard has caught, 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games. So I think it's hard to imagine playing Zach Ertz in cash, but he is probably, actually undoubtedly the best tight end play on the slate. And then, we look into this range where I think we're going to find most of our plays. We've got Jacob Hollister, who, I personally have a little bit of difficulty trusting in this spot. This is another player who scored 3 touchdowns in his last 2 weeks. Now, the targets and the receptions were definitely, good to see. 8 receptions on 10 targets in his last game. Is that an anomaly? I think that the sample size is too small to tell. I would guess that it is, and I think that, besides Lockett, this could go to Metcalf, it could go to Gordon, it could go to Hollister, it could stay on the ground with Carson. I think it's really difficult to project Jacob Hollister for a substantial, target projection on a week-to-week basis. And he's right in the same price range as a bunch of guys. Ryan Griffin, 4,200. I was totally on Griffin last week, and then like a total fish, faded him in cash when I knew he was one of the best plays. He completely smashed, obviously, 8.5x his salary. Just nuts, but now he's been priced up to 4,200. He's in that same price range now as Greg Olsen. And, Olsen has been up and down all year. He's really hard, I think, to trust in cash. It helps that he gets the majority of his production from targets and from catches and, yardage, opposed to just touchdown or bust, like a lot of these guys we're talking about. So, I don't hate Olsen for 4,100, but, Kyle Allen is just so bad. I don't really trust, anybody in this offense to do anything. I think the Saints could completely smash the Panthers in this spot. And then, if we're paying down sub 4K, like I said, Goddard has been very productive over the last 4, but, so much of that is coming from touchdowns. I feel like that could all go to Ertz in any given weeks. So it's tough to trust that, no doubt about it. Cameron Brate, I think it's safe to say that his 14 target, 10 reception game last week was a complete aberration. I don't think we've ever seen that kind of usage for Cameron Brate, and I doubt that we ever will again. Even though it may be safe to say at this point that O.J. Howard is a scrub, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Bruce Arians continue to roll Brate as the starter out here, which I think does make him viable. Again, it's just really difficult to trust even as the primary tight end in this Bucs offense. And then Gesicki, look, it's been 3 weeks now, right? Gesicki had that one game 3 weeks ago, 95 yards on 6 receptions, and, we thought the breakout was coming. And since, the production really has not been there. He's had exactly 6 targets in 3 games straight. He's second on the team in targets from Fitzpatrick behind Devontae Parker. And, I think he's a valid paydown option. If we're going to get 6 targets even at 3.4K, I've played worse tight ends, tight ends with worse projections in cash before. And I think that on a, week that we're going to be desperate to save salary in some way, shape, or form, I think Gesicki is definitely in play. The Browns lost Burnett. They're going to be without Garrett, Ogunjobi. I think they're definitely vulnerable to this Dolphins offense in this spot. Maybe it finally happens for Gesicki. Looking over at defense, again, like it's just a complete theme of the week that I just don't see where the value is. None of these super low price defenses I think are that interesting. I would definitely consider Miami against Cleveland. Everybody is so high on the Browns this week, but Mayfield has been super turnover prone, and it could be a major letdown spot I think for the Browns. But I wouldn't go there in cash, especially considering I think Mayfield's probably where my lean is, at least now, for a cash game quarterback. So I'm not gonna go there in any, I'm not going to want to be there anyways. And then, what are we going to play the Giants on the road? Maybe for 2,900, but that's so expensive for a speculative defense play like that. It's tough. I think if I'm going up to that range, we could look at the Saints, at home against Kyle Allen. I think that is a really, interesting spot to look. The Falcons, maybe 3,500 if you believe that they are legit against the Bucs. Jameis Winston meltdown in play, absolutely. For 200 more, we got the Bears, 3,700, at home against Daniel Jones, who is also extremely, extremely turnover prone. That's, viable. And then the Steelers as the pay up option, 4K. They finally broke their streak of just monster games, only putting up 1 point against the Browns, but would not be surprised to see them rebound in a major, major way in this spot against, arguably the worst offense in the league against Cincinnati. So, I think that's about all there is that's viable in terms of cash games. Obviously, you can go off the board for GPPs. The Bills I didn't mention at 3,400 I would definitely consider, but I like the Saints a little more for 100 less. So, again, 2 weeks ago, I thought it was a major priority that we got the Steelers in there over comparable teams like the Browns and the Bills in that range. This week, much like last week, I think it's just a matter of, letting the chips fall where they will, if you will, and just sort of letting, defense, be the last piece of your puzzle. Hopefully, you can afford a decent defense this week. Obviously, we're going to be starved for value. So, the cheapest viable play you can find might be the smartest one. So, that's really all I've got for this week. It's going to be a really difficult week. Like I said, follow me on Twitter because I'm going to be tracking the opportunity of, any real value. And just a quick update here. This happened while I was recording. I noticed that Nelson Aguilar missed the game. Maybe Alshon Jeffrey for 4,900 will open up as I think, really awesome value if he plays, but we're still waiting to see what Jeffrey's status is going to be. As of now, maybe that makes Dallas Goedert a slightly better punt tight end. Or maybe not, maybe even we go to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside for min price. Now that would be intriguing if Nelson Aguilar were to sit and maybe say Alshon were also to sit, or maybe even, if Alshon was in, just sort of increase the scoring upside of this whole team and then just, get Arcega-Whiteside in there. So, that's definitely going to be something to monitor. I'll be keeping a track on that and really all movings throughout the NFL. So, follow me on Twitter and, we'll keep posted on how, this DraftKings slate continues to evolve as the week goes on. But hopefully this gives you a solid starting point to, start building a cash pool for yourself. So, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. And, let's follow up last week's Monster Cash Game Week with another one on this difficult slate. So, yeah, let's get it.